They stood for a long time, not speaking, her presence simply reminding him that he was not alone, that she was there with him. She was unsure of how much time had passed, but when the moment felt right, she stepped into his eye line, looking up at him with immense tenderness. He wasn't yet ready to meet her gaze, but that was all right. She stepped closer, lay her left hand on his chest, over his heart, and gently squeezed the hand she was still holding. "Walter," she began, 3 years ago, I chose the remotest place I could reach and walked out into the high desert with no food, a day's worth of water, and no intention of ever coming back. The odds against our paths ever crossing out there were more than 1,000,000 to 1. But somehow, you found me, and you helped me. You could have berated me for being another idiot hippie greenhorn lost in the desert, but I think you knew I wasn't lost, didn't you? He looked at her and nodded, slowly beginning to separate himself from his overwhelming grief, and returned to her. You took me in, a complete stranger, into your home, she continued. I know that wasn't easy for you. I know I wasn't part of your plans. But even still, you were so good to me, good in ways I'd forgotten people could be. So good that before I knew it, I started to think that maybe being alive wasn't such a bad thing after all. She gently lay her hands on his face, ran her fingers through the hair at his graying temples, and touched her forehead to his. That's what I mean when I say you saved my life, Walter. You gave me back my faith that people can be decent, even in a hateful world. Her eyes became filled with tears, and when she tried to blink them away, they cascaded down her cheeks. But she didn't stop to wipe them away. You showed me it was safe to trust in someone again. Do you understand what that meant to me? His voice was failing him, but he managed to whisper, Yeah, I do. So I will never regret meeting you. Never. No matter what happens from here, don't you ever forget that. Okay? Walter nodded again. Okay. She slipped her arms around him and put her chin on his shoulder, and in turn he slowly wound his arms around her and pulled her to him, holding her tight. I'm sorry, he whispered, his face buried in her thick, dark hair. I'm sorry, too, she whispered, and brushed her lips against his cheek and kissed him softly, then pressed herself tight to him again. I love you. I love you. I love you, she murmured, again and again. Walter let her words wash over him, and for the first time in their relationship, he didn't fight them, and allowed himself to believe her. After a long, long while, he very gently pulled away and lay one strong, work-worn hand on her face and stroked her cheek, looking at her with a wonder almost as if he was seeing her for the first time, yet tinged with the longing for her he'd worked so hard to restrain for all these years. Sarah gazed up at him, eyes shining, and nestled her cheek into the well of his calloused palm. For Walter's entire life he had held himself in check, focused on the mission, priding himself in his detachment and self-denial. But now, in this moment, there was no need to deny himself of this, of her. No need to martyr himself any longer for the cause that had ultimately betrayed him. He no longer had a reason to deprive himself of this love he had waited for over 50 long years. "I love you," he whispered, then drew her to him and kissed her full on the mouth, strong and deep, and with an unmistakable promise of what lay ahead.